Hi, I'm Larry Higgins with Skip Genie, and I'm here at the Propelio Academy. And we're talking about skip tracing, but today we're specifically going to talk about hard to find owners and scripts for cold calling. So with skip tracing, you tend to find deceased owners quite a bit. So what do you do when that happens? Well, first and foremost, you're going to run reports on the likely relatives to get all their contact information. Sometimes there's going to be a lot of relatives, sometimes not as many, but just go ahead and run that search and find those relatives. After that, if the person is deceased or you're presuming they've died, the first thing I like to do outside of the skip trace report is do an obituary search. And the reason I do that, even if there's plenty of relatives listed, sometimes there's so many relatives listed you don't know exactly who's who, how they might be related. The obituary will typically spell out exactly who the closest relatives are: spouse, children, aunts, uncles, grandparents. You know what your typical obituary does. So that's key information sometimes when you just have a lot of relatives. Or on the opposite end of that is sometimes you can't find any relatives or very, very few and you just can't reach them. The obituary may be a way to get a new name of a new relative that you just didn't have any awareness of. When you can't find any relatives, most people you can, but you do come across some you just can't find any relatives. If you can find an obituary, a lot of times it'll give you, the name of a church or the funeral home that did the service, and you can reach out to them. They may, even if they know a family member, they may not give you that information, but they may pass along a message for you if you're trying to connect with that family. Okay, so you found an owner that's died and you can't find any relatives. What do you do now? Your first step is going to be search all the different addresses that are associated with that deceased owner. When you just search the address, you're looking to see what names come back at those addresses. Do you see any of the same last name? It may be family that they wouldn't necessarily show up on the report for some reason, on the subject's report, but when you search different addresses, you might see possible or potential family members you just couldn't find previously. The next thing I would do is try the county probate records. There's a good chance that there was never a probate action done on that deceased owner, but maybe they were a party to somebody else's probate action, their parents, their spouses, or another close family member. And what you're really looking for, you're just looking to see, can you find any new names, any new addresses, any new information that can help get you a little further along the line, down the road with that lead. The other thing, if there's no probate records found, you can try and do a basic genealogy search. You can use websites like Ancestry.com, MyHeritage.com. I never go in depth. I'm not really good at the genealogy, but you can do some very basic searching, and it can be pretty effective at times. So by just searching the deceased owner's name, year of birth, and address, sometimes you'll actually find new relatives that you could find no trace of through any other resource. You might find them with the genealogy. And just like with anything else, the better you are, if you're really good at genealogy, it might be a really functional, useful tool for you to do some in-depth researching. So let's say the owner's deceased and you're just at a complete dead end with the heirs. They're just non-existent, you cannot find them. There's not as many of these out there, but these types of deals do happen. And at this point, you just really need to do an assessment of the lead. What's going on with this property? Is it confirmed vacant? What's the value of the property? Are there delinquent taxes? Is there a loan not being paid? A loan in default? Any title issues? Basically, what are the odds of this being a really good deal? If you can find the rightful legal owners of this property, does it have a lot of equity? And on top of that, does it have a lot of distress? And at this point, you need to make a decision, yes or no. If yes, it's probably worth maybe taking a look at having a genealogist help you find some relatives. We all have relatives. We all have heirs. It's just a matter of how many and how distant they are. So do an assessment of the deal. If say it's vacant, it's pending auction or something to that effect, that's highly distressed. And there's no close heirs, no children, no siblings, no parents, no spouse. That's probably going to be worth the investment of $100, $200 and having a genealogist help you out. An example of that would be a house we did off of Joy. So this was a property where when we skip traced the owner, we found out she died. We skip traced her son, found out he died about 10 years after her. and she's still the legal owner per the appraisal district. So they had a serious tax delinquency as well. So this property is in Harris County, it's in Houston. It would have been on a common mailing list. Every investor in Houston was everybody that mails delinquent taxes was sending mail to this lady. What they didn't know was she died in like year 2000. They did know that her heir took over the house, but he died about 12 years later. They didn't know that everybody mailing them did not know that the rightful owner of that property was not getting the mail and that they just weren't reaching the right person. So we skip traced, we established all this, and we found, I'll never forget, one morning I did my basic research. I was at a dead end using a basic genealogy site, finding a very old obituary, got connected with a relative, and she turns out that she lived in Alaska. So as I get her on the phone, we start talking. She confirms she was related to the owner that had died. I had to inform her that her cousin died that she hadn't seen in 20 years, that she owned a legal interest in this property. She wasn't the sole owner, but she owned the interest. By then we had established that there were squatters living in the property and that they owed like $30,000 or $40,000 in taxes in the property. And that turned out to be a really, really good deal. On the other side of the family, we were at a dead end, couldn't find anybody. That's when we brought in a genealogist to help us figure out who those heirs were, who the family was. Being willing to pay that $150, $200 was the difference in us whether or not we got that deal done, and we did, and it was a $150,000 deal. So do that assessment, yes, no. If it's worth it, take a look at getting a genealogist involved. So the owner's deceased, you found plenty of relatives, but who are the actual heirs to the estate if there is no will? And I talk about this a lot because the nature of a really distressed property or vacant properties, in general, they're vacant or they're distressed for a reason, especially when the owners died. If the owners died, why would they let the house go vacant, or why would they not pay the bills on it? Generally, what you're going to find out is there is no will. So who are the legal heirs? Who has legal rights to that property? Again, it's not a rule, but generally there is no will involved. And in these cases, it could be any number of type of relatives. Could be children, could be parents, could be siblings, could be aunts and uncles, could be cousins, could even be second cousins. The right answer is talk to your attorney, talk to your title company. They're going to tell you exactly who are the legal heirs based off of the circumstances. You know, we do have heirship laws that cover that process and how the flow of heirship goes in Texas. It's really simple to get done, but just get the relatives on the phone, try and get to as close to that deceased owner as you can, and then have that conversation with your title company. Generally, the affidavit, we'll do what's called an affidavit of heirship. The vast majority of times that will satisfy the requirements for what we're trying to do for wholesaling or buying. Another thing, they may, in real small estates, it may be quicker and easier, depending on the number of relatives, to do something that's called a small estate affidavit. So you've got options there. Just again, the goal is talk to the closest relatives possible, talk to your title company, and they'll let you know the exact requirements. So the owners died. What is the probate process? On the previous slide, we talked about the affidavit of heirship and a small estate affidavit as well. This really gets beyond skip tracing, obviously, but the types of properties and really motivated distressed leads that we skip trace, this is just a common process. They kind of go hand in hand for a lot of these leads, so I feel like it's worth discussing. Now, outside of Texas, you may or may not be able to do an affidavit of heirship, but in Texas, it's a tremendously useful tool. It's good that you have a solid knowledge base about these. And if it's available in the other states outside of Texas where it applies, it's something that you should know about. So what is the affidavit of heirship exactly? Well, it's basically just an affidavit stating the facts of that deceased person's life. And to get that done, you need what's called one affiant, which is generally a close family member that's going to provide the facts of that person's life. And those facts include, you know, date of birth, date of death, when that person was married, is that person their spouse, are they alive, are they dead, were they divorced, the status there. a list of all natural and adopted children that that deceased person had. And generally they're going to want their addresses and contact information as well. Real property owned by the decedent. Again, decedent being the deceased owner of the property that you're interested in, as well as debts that the decedent owed. And then on top of that affidavit, you're going to need what's called 2 disinterested witness affidavits. These are 2 people that, in a nutshell, they don't stand to make any, they no financial gain for them to make by signing off that affidavit is true and correct to the best of their knowledge. So the affidavit of heirship, the 2 witness affidavits, all have to be signed and notarized. One thing I will point out is be aware of deceptive heirs. They are out there. They will try and cut other heirs out of deals. So one thing I do is just kind of a test when I'm talking to different heirs. I'll just ask them, hey, can you tell me about, just double check them. How many heirs are there? How many brothers and sisters are there? How many cousins are there? Just try and vouch that you're getting the same information from all the different heirs, and nobody's trying to intentionally leave anybody out. It does happen. That's one reason that you do need to get a copy of the death certificate and an obituary or funeral program if you can get your hands on it. Maybe that will give you some new information. I did catch somebody giving me false information on an affidavit because when I look at on the death certificate, there's something called an informant. This is the person that talks to the hospital or the doctor and gives them the information on the person that died. Well, the informant's name was a son that the other siblings had just totally left out of all the information they'd given me. Had I not just looked at that one detail, I never would have known this guy existed. They would have tried to cut him out of his legal inheritance, really. Okay, so you've done your research, you found the owner or the heirs, now it's time to actually contact the owner. Not something a lot of people look forward to, but just do not be scared. Just pick up the phone and start dialing. It's not as bad, it's not a traumatizing event. It's not, people don't get that mad. I've actually had a lot of pleasant conversations with people, especially if you're calling truly distressed people that are more likely to need your help. It is a good phone call when you can reach out to them and they may have literally just been waiting for this type of help that you're willing to provide. I will say when you do this, don't just wing it. That's how I started out, and there was a lot of painful conversations initially on my end just because I was stumbling through, not knowing what to say, and I was much better once I developed kind of my own script. It wasn't anything I wrote down initially. It was just through practice and iteration, I realized I had a script. If you're hesitant, you're just really not looking forward to doing it, it happens. Even if you've been calling for a while, it can wear you down after a while. You just have to have the mindset that, hey, there's $40,000, $80,000, whatever, $100,000 on the other end of that line, but you can't get it unless you start dialing. And those are real numbers because we have gotten those types of deals through picking up the phone and calling these owners. Okay, so let's say you started dialing and you just can't reach the owner. So what do you do next? Well, this can happen for various reasons. So don't get too stressed out at this point. You literally may be calling the owner, but the owner may not even realize they own the property or that they can sell it. So they may be getting your messages and they don't think they own it. So why would they bother taking the time to call you back? And we'll get into that. First and foremost, don't hesitate to call the relatives. If you call the owner, you've left 2 or 3 messages, they're not calling you back, skip trace the relatives and start dialing. It's going to save you time and energy, and ultimately calling the relatives will make a difference in whether or not you're going to get some of these deals. A couple of examples that we have, just stuff we've done, just why calling relatives, just to highlight why calling relatives is so important. There was a house that we were pursuing over off of Sanford in Houston, and just could not, the owner on the skip trace report, he had some working numbers, but he would never call us back. He was just totally silent. He wouldn't reply back to any text messages. We weren't even sure if we had a good number. So I didn't hesitate. I just started dialing relatives. I didn't know who they were, how they were related to him. We just started dialing. Well, I got in touch with his sister, and she said, look, my brother's extremely hard to get on the phone. He just changed his number. I don't even have it. He works a lot. He generally doesn't get home till about 8:30 at night. So in this scenario, I said, you know what, it's probably easier just to go knock on the door. But I wouldn't have known this had I not talked to the sister and known what time of day to go knock on the door. So we actually my partner went out and met him right on the dot at 8:30. He was pulling in his driveway. And that ended up leading to a $50,000 deal. Had I just kept trying to call the owner and not getting a response, and to this day I don't know if we had the right number, had I just kept doing that, we wouldn't have got the deal. But I didn't hesitate. I called the sister, taking the time to pull that report, call her, led to $50,000 deal. That's just one example. Another one is a property over off of Chestnut. This was one, house was obviously vacant, trying to get in touch with the owner and just couldn't get a good number for him. So rather than getting frustrated, pulling my hair out, saying this sucks, say, pull reports on the relatives, start dialing. So got in touch, again, I didn't know who they were, how they were related. Got in touch with somebody who said he was the owner's uncle. He said, yeah, you're not going to get in touch with my nephew because he lives in Saudi Arabia. He's been working there for 5 years. He said, I tell you what, send me an email with your information. I'll forward it to him. If he's interested, he'll contact you. Well, about a month later, the nephew indeed was interested. He contacted us. That led to a $15,000 deal. So again, I can't stress enough, taking the time to call relatives will make a difference in whether or not you get some of these deals. So scripts, why do we use them? First and foremost, they will make your calls, especially in the beginning. They're going to help your calls go a lot smoother. They're designed so that you keep the owner or the person you're talking to, you keep them from getting their guard or suspicions up that you're up to no good. Because that's just a natural reaction when you call somebody out of the blue and they don't know you like that. So the scripts will come in very handy in that regard. When you cold call, and a good script will do this, your number one objective is to identify who you are and why you're calling before that person has to ask you. If you don't answer that question and they have to ask you that, they've already started getting a little bit suspicious in their mind. Maybe really suspicious, depending on what's going on in their life. And so answer who you are and why you've been calling, and that'll start the conversation, helps improve the odds of a good conversation there. You should have different scripts for different scenarios. If I'm calling the owner of a vacant property, that script will be a little bit different versus the script of I'm calling a relative to a deceased owner, that kind of thing. So use different scripts as applicable. The scripts that we use, the scripts I've used personally, they were developed over time. It was just through practice, iteration, and lots of phone calls. You may change, add to different things, the scripts you do, but be open to change. And sometimes you're going to do that just based off of feedback with sellers. I know I can think of 2 very specific phone calls I had that made me revise the scripts that we use because they were not good phone calls. But since I made those revisions, we haven't had an issue. One of the goals of the script, or when you're making these cold calls, make a conscious effort to sound as friendly and as personable as possible. Sound like somebody that you wouldn't mind talking to. Just be friendly. It's real easy as you're doing a lot of phone calls, or maybe you've been doing a lot of research sitting at your desk. You're a little drained. Your energy levels get low. You may sound real monotone. Put a smile on your face and just sound energetic and sound like you're happy to be talking to them. That'll go a long way in building rapport. And last and certainly not least, do not sound like you're reading a script. Even if you're using a script, have it. You may not have to know it verbatim, but it should roll off your tongue naturally. It should not sound like you're just sitting there reading it word for word, looking down at a piece of paper. Then it's just going to be obvious, and that really defeats the purpose of it. So now we'll get into the actual scripts that we're using, and the first one we'll deal with is talking to the owner of a vacant property. This is structured very intentionally, and I'll point out some of this once I run through this. I just want you to hear this isn't a natural conversation because I don't have an owner on the other end of the line, but as best as I can, I'll just show you how my tone and the way I approach these calls. So let's say the owner's name is John Smith. I'm going to go ahead and call him and ring, ring, ring. Hi, can I speak to John, please? He answers, says, yeah, this is John. Like, hey, John, this is probably kind of out of the blue for you, but my name's Larry Higgins, and not too long ago I drove by a house. It appears you own over off of Main Street, and I could be mistaken, but I thought it might be vacant, so I just wanted to see if you had any interest in selling the house. So there are intentional pauses and hesitations throughout that process. It's very intentional. I'm not trying to sound really polished. You notice I know the owner's full name, but I just asked for his first name initially. So rather than say, hi, can I speak to John Smith, please? I say, hey, can I speak to John, please? That just sounds much more friendly and less like a business when you do that. I knew the full property address, but I just referenced the street name. The reason that's important is if say you were to leave a voicemail, and again, this is through a painful phone call I had at one point. I left a voicemail with the exact address, and I had an irate phone call 10 minutes later. The lady said, what are you doing? You didn't know whose voicemail this was. You could have just told a complete stranger that my house was vacant. She had a very good point. I took that to heart. So unless I know I'm talking to the owner, I just reference the street name. If it's the right person or even a close relative, just using that street name as a reference will probably if they can help, that's going to be enough information for them. So moving on to the next script, we'll get into talking to a property owner when you're just not sure if the house is vacant or not. So again, we'll assume the owner's name is John Smith. We'll say, hey, I'm going to dial him. Hi, can I speak to John, please? He answers, hey, this is John. Hey, John, this is probably kind of the blue for you, but my name's Larry Higgins. And the reason I'm calling is I'm looking for properties to buy over in the area where your house off of Main Street is. And I just wanted to reach out to you to see if you had any interest in selling that house. Notice I didn't say that the house is vacant, I think it's vacant, or anything like that. Because if it's not, if he lives there, that could be perceived as an insult to him. So if he's interested in selling, I've let him know I'm buying and I'm interested in that area. That's why we leave that one a little bit more generic. And again, this one is structured that way because I had a painful phone call. A house that I thought was vacant. I was positive in my mind it was vacant. I called the guy, said, hey, saw you got this vacant house, I'd like to buy it. He bit my head off. He's like, what are you talking about vacant? I live here. And I felt bad about that because to me, it was a horrible, horrible living. I don't know how anybody was living in it. So that's why we just kind of leave it generic. If they're interested, they'll take a bite and you'll get a deal. If not, you just move on to the next one. Okay, so now we'll move into the next type of script, and this is when you're talking to a relative or associate of the owner. So again, for this script, we'll be calling John Smith. John answers, hi, can I speak to John, please? Yeah, this is John. Hey, John, this is probably kind of the blue for you, but my name is Larry Higgins. I don't even know if you can help or not, but I'm trying to reach, Bill Smith to see if he has any interest in selling a property I think he owns over off of Main Street. I just hadn't had any luck getting in contact with him. Would you happen to be familiar with Bill or the house off of Main Street by any chance? Again, not polished, not trying to sound like a business. I'm letting him know who I am, why I'm calling, and if he knows anything about that person or that street, if he's inclined to help, he will. So that's what we use when we're calling a relative or an associate of an owner like that. Okay, moving on to our next script. This is when you're talking to a relative or associate of a deceased owner. So in this case, that owner has died and you're reaching out to the family or the friends to try and find out who owns or controls that property to see if they have any interest in selling. For this exercise, we'll be calling John Smith again. Let's say I'm calling, he answers, hi, can I speak to John, please? And he says, this is him. Hey, John, this is probably kind of out of the blue for you, but my name's Larry Higgins, and I'm not even sure if you can help or not, but I'm trying to reach someone related to, Johnny Smith. The reason I'm calling is I saw he owned a house over off Main Street, and I just wanted to see if, whoever owns or controls that property now, if they have any interest in selling it. Again, I'm coming from a place of, I'm an individual. I wasn't sounding real polished, And I'm really trying to sound like I'm coming from a place of I'm looking for help. Can you help me get in touch with the right person? Help me get in contact. And that has been a pretty effective script for us. I deal with a lot of deceased property owners. This is a script that I have to use quite a bit. So that covers scripts when there's actually a live person that answers, but in a lot of cases you're going to get a voicemail, or for the older people, you know, believe it or not, some people still have answering machines. So you're going to use the same script. You're just going to add a little bit to that. Again, whatever script is applicable for that scenario, and all you're going to do is add something to the effect of, you get to the end of the message, and if you could call or text me back at 281-555-000, I would really appreciate it. Again, my name's Larry Higgins, and if you could call or text me back at your convenience at 281-555-0000, I would really appreciate it. Thanks. So I've repeated my number twice, so if it is an answering machine, they don't have to rewind. They can just listen to it while they're writing, and in case they don't hear me correctly, they hear it a second time if for some reason they're not sure about the number. I've also given them my name at the very end. So that's what we do, the slight tweak that we make for voicemails. So we've talked about scripts when you can't get them on the phone or you're establishing contact and what to say. But what do you do when you just can't get in contact with the owner? This is a reality. This is just part of the skip tracing reality. And this can happen for various reasons. It could be you just can't get a good phone number. That happens. I don't care what service you use. Sometimes you just can't get a good phone number. Maybe it's a good phone number and you don't know if it's the right one, meaning the phone number works, it rings. There's even a messaging system, but nobody leaves a name, so you're not sure who you're calling. Or maybe you actually have a good phone number, you know it's a good phone number, but you can't get a response from that person. You can't get them to call you back or to reply to you. You know, that can happen for various reasons. The key here is just, you've got to stay tenacious. Really and truly, the fortunes are in the follow through. If these are really distressed leads, you know, don't just give up, don't just stop because you're not sure or you just think they're not interested. If they haven't told you that, don't make assumptions. So in the next process, we'll talk about what I call the escalation process. What to do when you either can't reach them or they're non-responsive. So again, I'm Larry Higgins. If you have any questions or comments about any of the material we've covered, feel free, shoot me an email at larry@skipgenie.com or send your questions or comments in the comment section below, and we'll get back to you as quick as we can.